In 1965, in a city that smelled of metal and smoke, a 17-year-old boy stood alone with something that didn't belong to him. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame. It was a microphone stolen, hidden, and shaking in his hands. His name was John Michael Osbourne. No one called him Ozzy yet. No one cared enough to remember it. He wasn't a prodigy. He wasn't trained. He didn't come from talent scouts or music schools. He came from Birmingham, where boys didn't become musicians. They became workers, welders, or nothing at all, and Ozzy was running out of time. School had already given up on him. Teachers had written him off as slow. Employers saw him as replaceable. His future was loud factories and quiet desperation. If he was lucky, music wasn't a dream. It was an escape route. That night, the microphone felt heavier than it should have. Not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. If he got caught, he wouldn't just lose a chance to sing. He'd lose the last thread of belief anyone had in him, especially his father. At home, music wasn't ambition. It was noise, it was rebellion. It was disrespect. His father believed in stability, discipline, and survival. Singing into a stolen microphone wasn't survival, it was stupidity. And Ozzy knew that. But as he waited backstage, listening to the muffled sound of a crowd that didn't know he existed, something hardened inside him. This wasn't confidence. This was defiance. The kind that comes when you've already been counted out. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to prove to himself that he wasn't invisible. One performance, one chance to be heard, one moment before everything could collapse. That night wouldn't make him famous. It wouldn't fix his life. It wouldn't even make sense to most people watching. But it would start something dark, loud, and impossible to control. Because before Ozzy Osbourne became a legend, before the world called him the Prince of Darkness, he was just a 17-year-old boy with a stolen microphone, an angry father waiting at home, and nothing left to lose. Birmingham in the mid-1960s wasn't a place where dreams grew. It was a place that wore people down. The air was thick with smoke from factories that never slept. The streets were stained with oil, soot, and routine. Every morning, men poured into plants and foundries, their lives measured in shifts, not years. Noise was constant. Silence meant unemployment. This was the world Ozzy Osbourne was born into. In Birmingham, ambition wasn't encouraged. It was corrected. You didn't ask what you wanted to be. You took what work was available and thanked God you had it. Creativity was a luxury. Music was background noise on the radio after a long day, not a future. For boys like Ozzy, the path was already drawn. Leave school early, get a job fast, don't complain, and definitely don't chase fantasies. Ozzy's family lived working-class reality every day. Money was tight. Security was fragile. There was no safety net for failure. One wrong move could drag the entire household down. That pressure hung over everything, especially over sons. In that environment, music didn't look brave. It looked reckless. To older generations in Birmingham, artists were people who failed at real work. Singing wasn't a skill, it was an excuse. Playing in bands was something you grew out of, not something you bet your life on. Ozzy felt that judgment constantly. He didn't fit the mold. He wasn't tough in the traditional sense. He wasn't academically gifted. He didn't shine in factories or classrooms. Birmingham rewarded conformity. And Ozzy was anything but conforming. Everywhere he went, the city reminded him of what he was supposed to become, and how little room there was for anything else. Yet ironically, the same city that crushed dreams also forged something darker. The endless machinery, the metallic rhythm of industry, the bleakness of everyday survival. It seeped into Ozzy's bones. The heaviness of Birmingham wasn't just external. It shaped how he felt, how he heard sound, how he understood intensity. It created a hunger for noise that wasn't mechanical, but emotional. Most people in the city accepted their limits. They learned to live small and call it responsible. Ozzy couldn't. He didn't want a softer life. He wanted a louder one. And in a city that punished anyone who stood out, that desire alone made him dangerous to expectations, to tradition, and to himself. Birmingham wasn't just where Ozzy grew up. It was the force he had to survive before he could become anything at all. School was supposed to be the way out. For Ozzy, it became proof that there was no exit at all. From the beginning, he struggled in ways no one bothered to understand. Words didn't behave the way they did for other kids. Letters blurred, instructions twisted. By the time he caught up, the class had already moved on. Teachers didn't see dyslexia, they saw laziness. Questions were met with sighs, mistakes with ridicule. Eventually, even trying felt pointless. When you're treated like you're slow long enough, you stop arguing. You start believing it. Ozzy learned early that classrooms weren't built for people like him. Every report card carried the same quiet message: not good enough. Not smart enough to succeed. Not disciplined enough to matter. The future being prepared for him wasn't ambition, it was containment. School didn't just fail Ozzy, it shrunk him. While other students were guided toward trades or advancement, Ozzy was nudged toward the margins. Low expectations became a self-fulfilling sentence. Nobody asked what he was good at, they only noted what he wasn't, and music didn't help his case. When Ozzy sang, it wasn't polite, it wasn't refined. His voice had edges, uneven, emotional, raw. To authority figures, that didn't sound like potential, it sounded like noise. At home, the pressure tightened. His father believed in structure, in order, in practical decisions that kept families fed. He wasn't cruel, but he was unforgiving of weakness. From his perspective, Ozzy wasn't struggling, he was wasting time. Each argument circled the same point: what's your plan? Ozzy didn't have one, and that terrified everyone, including him. Without education, without a trade, without approval, the road ahead narrowed to a single option: factory work. Long hours, short patience, a lifetime of repetition, the same life he saw breaking men twice his age. He could feel it closing in, every failed test, every disappointed look, every lecture about reality. By 17, Ozzy wasn't just behind, he was cornered. That's when music stopped being a hobby. It became the only place where he wasn't corrected, interrupted, or told to sit down. When he sang, no one asked him to spell. No one graded him. No one measured him against expectations he couldn't meet. His voice didn't need permission. It needed volume. With nowhere else to go, Ozzy made a quiet, dangerous decision. If the system had no place for him, he would build something outside it, no matter how fragile, no matter how risky. Because staying meant disappearing. And Ozzy Osbourne was already tired of being invisible. Dreams are expensive. Ozzy learned that fast. Wanting to sing was one thing. Being able to sing in front of people was another. Bands needed equipment. Venues expected gear. Even the smallest performance demanded things Ozzy simply didn't have and couldn't afford. No savings, no backing, no second chances. Every path forward was blocked by money. Ozzy tried asking. He tried waiting. He tried pretending it would work itself out. But the truth was brutal and simple: without a microphone, there was no performance. Without a performance, there was no future beyond factories and failure. That's when desperation stepped in. The microphone wasn't stolen in a moment of arrogance. It wasn't a thrill. It wasn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was a calculated risk made by someone who felt time collapsing around him. Ozzy knew exactly what he was doing. If he got caught, the consequences wouldn't be small. His father would explode. Any remaining trust at home would evaporate. The label of problem child would harden into something permanent. But not trying felt worse. The moment he took the microphone, his hands shook. His heart pounded louder than any music he'd ever heard. This wasn't criminal confidence. It was fear mixed with resolve. For the first time, Ozzy wasn't just imagining escape. He was forcing it. As he hid the microphone and walked away, the weight of it followed him, not physical weight, but psychological. Every step felt watched. Every sound felt suspicious. The city that had always ignored him suddenly felt alert, hostile, ready to catch him slipping. That fear stayed with him all the way to the venue. Backstage, the microphone sat there like evidence. Proof of what he'd done. Proof of how far he'd gone. He kept replaying the same thought. This could end everything before it even begins. But there was no turning back now. The crowd outside didn't know his name. They didn't know his story. They didn't know he'd broken rules just to stand near a stage. To them, he was nothing, another unknown voice in a city full of noise. To Ozzy, this was everything. This wasn't about sounding perfect. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about being heard at least once, without interruption, without correction, without someone telling him to stop. As the moment approached, something strange happened. The fear didn't disappear. It sharpened. It focused him. All the humiliation from school. All the disappointment at home. All the voices that said you're not built for more than this, they funneled into a single point. If he failed on his own terms. If he succeeded even briefly, it would prove one thing: he wasn't invisible. The microphone was stolen, but the moment wasn't. It was earned through risk, through fear, through a refusal to accept the life that had been handed to him without consent. When Ozzy finally stepped toward the stage, He didn't feel like a thief. He felt like someone standing on the edge of a life he might never get another chance to touch. And once he lifted that microphone, there would be no pretending this was just a phase. Because some lines, once crossed, don't let you go back. The lights were harsher than Ozzy expected. They weren't dramatic or flattering. They were blunt, white, unforgiving, exposing every movement. There was no place to hide on that stage, no shadow deep enough to disappear into. He stepped forward anyway. The room was small, crowded, and restless. People talked over one another, drinks clinked. Chairs scraped across the floor. No one was there for him. He wasn't the reason they'd shown up. To most of them, he was background noise waiting to be endured. Ozzy felt it immediately. His mouth went dry. His heart pounded so hard it made the microphone vibrate in his hand. For a brief, terrifying second, he considered walking off. No one would stop him. No one would even notice. But then the music started. It wasn't polished. The timing wasn't perfect. The setup was rough and improvised. But as the first notes filled the room, something in Ozzy locked into place. He opened his mouth, and his voice came out raw, not smooth, not trained, but alive. At first, people barely looked up. A few glanced toward the stage with mild curiosity, then turned back to their conversations. Ozzy felt the familiar sting of being dismissed. He pushed through it. The second line came out louder. More force behind it, less apology. His voice cracked in places, stretched in others, but it carried something that couldn't be ignored: emotion. One by one, heads began to turn. Conversations slowed. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. The room didn't erupt into applause, but it quieted. And for Ozzy, that silence was thunder. He wasn't singing at them anymore. He was pulling them in. Every word felt like a release. Years of being talked over, corrected, laughed at, they poured out through his voice. This wasn't performance as entertainment. This was survival made audible. Ozzy didn't think about technique. He didn't think about notes or form. He sang the way someone sings when they have nothing left to protect. And the audience felt it. They didn't know his name. They didn't know what he'd stolen to be there. They didn't know what waited for him at home. But they could feel that this wasn't an act. This was real. By the time the song ended, the room had changed. It wasn't loud with praise. It wasn't explosive with cheers. It was something more unsettling. Attention. People were looking at him now, not with confusion but with curiosity. Some with surprise. Some with discomfort. A few with genuine interest. For the first time in his life, Ozzy had control of the room. The moment didn't last long. Applause came, scattered and uneven. Some clapped out of politeness. Others didn't clap at all. And then the noise slowly returned, talking, laughing, moving on. The world didn't stop, but Ozzy did. As he stepped off the stage, his legs felt weak, like they might give out. Not from fear, but from the release of it. He hadn't failed. He hadn't disappeared. He had been heard. It didn't solve his problems. It didn't change his father's mind. It didn't erase the consequences waiting outside that room. But something fundamental had shifted. Ozzy Osbourne now knew what it felt like to command attention, not because someone allowed him to, but because his voice demanded it. And once you feel that, going back to silence becomes impossible. Ozzy didn't have to wait long to feel the fallout. The moment he returned home, the atmosphere hit him like a physical weight. The kitchen smelled of grease, old tea, and smoke, the same ordinary scents that had always meant order, routine, discipline. But tonight they carried an edge he had never felt before. His father was waiting. Not just waiting, watching. John Osbourne's eyes were sharp. Furious. He didn't ask questions at first. He didn't pace or shout immediately. He just stared, letting the silence stretch like steel cables. Ozzy could feel every heartbeat in his chest, every one of his teenage mistakes amplified in that gaze. Finally, the words came. "Do you think this is funny?" His father's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a storm ready to break. "Do you think stealing things and singing like a fool is going to get you anywhere?" Ozzy tried to explain, tried to tell him about the microphone, the performance, the attention he had received. But it was no use. His father didn't hear achievement. He didn't see courage. He saw disrespect. "You have nothing," his father said, voice rising. "No job, no future. And now you've gone and stolen from someone else. Do you understand what you've done?" Ozzy felt the old fear creep back, the one that had haunted him at school, the one that told him he was worthless. But alongside it, something stubborn burned. He had dared to perform. He had dared to be seen. And he couldn't take that back. I just wanted to sing, he said, voice shaking, almost breaking. I needed to be heard. His father's hand slammed against the table. Plates rattled. The anger wasn't abstract. It wasn't performance. It was tangible, threatening, suffocating. You'll never survive like this, his father shouted. You'll starve. You'll fail. You're throwing your life away for noise. Ozzy flinched but didn't turn away. There was a line inside him that had already been crossed. The line between invisibility and existence. That line couldn't be erased with anger, with shouting, with shame. You think this changes anything? His father said, pacing now, fists clenched. You think a stupid song makes up for the life I'm trying to give you? Ozzy's mind raced. He thought of the stage. The hush that had fallen over the room. The way people had actually listened to him. That moment of attention, fragile and fleeting, had felt more real than anything else in his life. I don't care, he whispered, barely loud enough to be heard. I have to do this. I can't just disappear. The room went silent again. His father's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but only a fraction. Then they hardened sharp as knives. You're a fool, he said finally, and fools get hurt. Remember that? Ozzy didn't argue. He didn't run. He just nodded, feeling the weight of reality press down on him. That rage, that fear, that disappointment, it was now a part of him. And like it or not, it would follow him through every stage, every song, every reckless choice he made from that night forward. Because if survival demanded conformity, Ozzy had already chosen the opposite. And sometimes, the people who love you most are also the ones who try hardest to stop you. He went to bed that night with a head full of music, a stolen microphone under his arm, and the certainty that the storm waiting for him outside his door wasn't going to end anytime soon. That rage, his father's rage, was the first cost of being heard, and Ozzy Osbourne would pay it. The night after his first performance, Ozzy lay awake in the small room he shared with his brother. Darkness pressed against the window panes. The hum of the city outside was muffled but insistent, a reminder that life went on, indifferent to his victories or failures. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the night over and over. The applause, or what counted as applause, still echoed faintly in his mind. The way people had actually listened, if only for a few moments. That rare silence, that fragile attention, it had felt like magic. Like gravity itself had paused to notice him. But then the memory of his father came flooding back, the fury in his eyes, the rage in his voice, the way the words had cut him deeper than any teacher's critique or peer's mockery. You're a fool. Fools get hurt. Remember that. Fools get hurt. And suddenly the thrill of the stage collided with reality. Ozzy realized he was 17 years old. Poor, uneducated, untrained, and already carrying the weight of everyone's expectations, real and imagined. Every step he took toward music felt like walking a razor's edge. One misstep, one bad decision, one act of rebellion too far, and he could lose everything. The stage could vanish. The audience could disappear. His father's fury could become unbearable. He thought about quitting. The thought was seductive. It whispered to him in the silence of his room. Go back. Find a factory job. Stop embarrassing yourself. Stop risking it all. Stop letting people down. Stop being a fool. He could disappear again. Fade back into invisibility, the safety of the unnoticed. No stolen microphones. No rage. No shame. No failure. But alongside that thought was another, louder and stranger. What if he didn't quit? What if he risked everything anyway? What if he leaned into the fear instead of running from it? What if he let the music carry him, even if the world, his father, his teachers, the city itself, was against him? The fear didn't vanish, it didn't even shrink. It doubled. It sharpened. Each heartbeat thudded like a drum, each breath felt like a countdown. His palms sweated, his stomach knotted. But for the first time, the fear wasn't paralyzing. It was a signal. This was the line. The moment where every choice boiled down to two paths. Retreat into safety or step into chaos. Ozzy imagined both paths. One was simple, sterile, predictable. It promised survival but nothing else. He would work. He would struggle. He would blend into the endless gray of Birmingham. No stage. No music. No recognition. He would be safe, but he would also be gone. The other path was terrifying. It promised risk, humiliation, danger, and uncertainty. His father would be furious. He could get caught. He could fail in front of everyone. But it also promised something else: being seen, being heard, being alive in a way he had never been. He clenched his fists. The city outside seemed quieter now, as if holding its breath. He could almost hear the stolen microphone calling to him. The weight of it wasn't just in his hands, It was in his chest, in his mind, in his very bones. For hours he lay there, paralyzed by the magnitude of choice. One wrong move could destroy him. One brave move could create him. He thought about the stage. About the first note that had broken through the noise. About the fleeting silence of the audience that had given him a glimpse of possibility. And then he thought about all the moments before that, the ridicule, the doubt, the failures, and realized he could never unhear or unsee them. They were part of him now. Finally, in the quiet of the night, he made his decision. He wouldn't retreat. He wouldn't disappear. He wouldn't let fear decide for him. The moment that could have ended everything became the moment he committed himself to everything. Ozzy Osbourne would take the risk. He would face the anger, the shame, the uncertainty. He would face the world and he would sing. Because sometimes, the only way to survive is to step straight into the thing that scares you the most and let it make you stronger. And in that choice, the first flicker of the Prince of Darkness began to stir. The next night, Ozzy returned to the stage. This time, he didn't hesitate. The fear was still there, buzzing under his skin like electricity, but it no longer ruled him. Every nerve, every muscle, every breath was sharpened by the memory of his first performance, the stolen microphone, and his father's anger. All of it fused into a single, undeniable truth. He had to be heard. He gripped the microphone as if it were a lifeline, and in a way it was. The lights fell on him. The small crowd hadn't changed, but he had. He was no longer a boy trembling at the edge of the stage. He was something else, something raw, unpredictable, alive. The first note tore from his throat, not polished, not trained, but pure, dark, and urgent. It carried all the anger, frustration, and longing he had buried since childhood. It carried the weight of every insult, every dismissal, every failure. The audience reacted immediately this time. They couldn't ignore him, they didn't want to. The sound wasn't just music. It was a force, pressing against them, challenging them, demanding attention. Something inside Ozzy had shifted. He realized he wasn't performing for approval anymore. He wasn't seeking validation. He was channeling something deeper, something untamed. The darkness that had always lurked at the edges of his life. The rage, the frustration, the fear of being invisible was no longer a liability. It was his power. He sang louder. He leaned into the microphone. His body moved in ways that felt instinctual, almost violent, but necessary. The crowd leaned in. They were captivated not by technique, but by the intensity, the raw humanity that poured from him. In that moment, Ozzy understood something vital. The world didn't shape him. He shaped himself. His music didn't need to be polite. It didn't need to be safe. It needed to be him, completely and without compromise. The stolen microphone no longer felt heavy. It felt like a crown, a symbol of defiance, a reminder that the risks he had taken, the anger he had faced, the fear he had endured, it had all led him to this moment. His voice cracked, soared, and rumbled through the room. The small venue seemed to shrink around him, bending to the intensity of his sound. And for the first time, Ozzy didn't care who judged him. He cared only that he existed fully, loudly and without apology. By the end of the set, the audience wasn't just listening, they were reacting. Some were shocked. Some were uncomfortable. A few were exhilarated. But all of them had been changed, if only slightly, by the force of a boy who refused to disappear. Backstage, Ozzy felt something stirring, a recognition that this was only the beginning. The darkness that had always followed him, that had made school unbearable, that had made home a battlefield, was no longer a curse. It was fuel. It was identity. The Prince of Darkness had not yet earned a crown, fame, or the world's recognition. But he had claimed the only thing that mattered, himself. In the quiet after the performance, Ozzy touched the microphone one last time. It was a simple, stolen object, but to him it was proof. Proof that fear could be turned into power, that anger could be turned into art, that the world, no matter how harsh, could be faced head-on, and survived. From that night on, nothing would be the same. Ozzy Osbourne had found his voice, and with it, the first spark of the legend that would become the Prince of Darkness was ignited. Looking back, that night was more than a performance, more than a stolen microphone and a frightened boy on a stage. It was the moment Ozzy Osbourne stopped being invisible and started becoming himself. The first applause had been small, scattered, almost polite. But the silence that had followed was thunderous. It had carried a message louder than any cheer you are seen, and that was worth more than a lifetime of approval from teachers, peers, or even his own father. He had been 17 years old. Poor, untrained, misunderstood, labeled slow, Foolish, reckless. The world had offered him a single-path conformity. A small, gray life where mistakes were dangerous and ambition was irrelevant. But Ozzy had chosen another path, the one nobody else wanted him to take. That choice had come at a cost. The rage of his father lingered like a shadow, a reminder that those who care about us most can also be the harshest judges. The fear of failure pressed against him constantly, reminding him that one wrong step could erase everything. And yet, for the first time, Ozzy realized that those stakes didn't matter as much as the truth of being heard. Music wasn't a hobby anymore, it was survival. It was identity. Every cracked note, every raw, imperfect word, every tremor of fear that still coursed through his voice became part of the story he was telling, not just to an audience, but to himself. He had discovered that the world didn't shape him, he shaped himself. The darkness that had haunted his childhood, the frustration, the anger, the sense of being misunderstood, was no longer a curse, it was fuel. It was energy that transformed fear into power, shame into performance, and risk into art. Ozzy had found a way to turn what most would see as weakness into his greatest strength. And in that transformation, something remarkable happened. Ozzy Osbourne became more than a boy on a stage. He became a symbol of defiance, a proof that audacity can forge greatness even in the smallest, harshest places. Birmingham had tried to crush him. School had labeled him slow. Family had scolded him for daring to reach beyond survival. Yet here he was, alive and vocal, claiming a space the world had never given him. The stolen microphone was never just an object. It was the embodiment of his courage. It represented the first time he decided that being seen mattered more than being safe, that taking a risk mattered more than following rules, that he would not disappear quietly into a life designed by others. And though fame, fortune, and the world's recognition were still years away, that night had already created something permanent. It had birthed an identity loud, defiant, raw, and unrepentant. A voice that could not be ignored. A presence that demanded attention. Ozzy Osbourne didn't yet know the weight of the legend he would become. He didn't know the stages he would fill, the records he would release, or the millions who would one day call him the Prince of Darkness. But he did know one thing: he had taken the first step. And sometimes, the first step is the hardest. In that small, dimly lit venue, with the echoes of applause fading and the weight of consequence pressing down, a boy had become something more. He had become himself. And that is where every legend begins, not with fame or fortune or acclaim, but with a choice to be heard, a choice to stand in the fear, the anger, and the risk, and declare to the world, I exist, and I will not disappear. Ozzy Osbourne had made that choice, and in doing so, the Prince of Darkness was born.